Cold CEO woke after surgery. Freezes to see the doctor who saved his life with child who looked exactly like him. The memory slammed into him with brutal clarity. The conference. The beautiful medical resident who had challenged his presentation, forcing him to defend points he'd never questioned. What would you do if you found out you had a child you never knew existed? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The machines keeping Victor Hale alive suddenly went silent in the ICU. But it wasn't death that shocked him awake. It was the sight of his own green eyes staring back at him from a stranger's face. What would you do if you woke up from surgery to discover a secret that could destroy everything you thought you knew about your life? Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality shifted in a single heartbeat? Where everything you believed about yourself crumbled? Victor Hale, the ruthless Ice King of Silicon Valley, was about to face the one thing his billions couldn't buy: the truth. But how do you confront a woman who saved your life when you destroyed hers first? The Georgia hospital room felt worlds away from his glass office towers. All beeping monitors and sanitized air that couldn't mask the weight of 6 years of secrets hanging between them. Victor's vision cleared slowly, the anesthesia fog lifting like morning mist. He expected to see his legal team, maybe his assistant with urgent contracts requiring his signature. Instead, a striking black woman in surgical scrubs stood beside his bed, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a little boy. The child couldn't have been older than 5, but those eyes, those unmistakable, piercing green eyes that had intimidated board members and closed billion-dollar deals, stared back at him with innocent curiosity. The same dimpled chin that had graced 3 generations of Hale men. Even that rare crescent-shaped birthmark behind the left ear, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. Victor's mouth went dry. His heart monitor started beeping faster. Oh, his voice came out as a croak. He tried again. Who is he? Dr. Ayanna Brooks didn't flinch. Her composure was steel wrapped in silk, the kind of calm that came from years of delivering news that changed lives forever. She looked directly into his eyes, the same green eyes that had once promised her everything and delivered nothing. He's yours, she said simply, but you wouldn't remember. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. His surgical sight throbbed, but that pain was nothing compared to the earthquake happening in his chest. The boy stepped closer to his mother, small fingers gripping her scrub top with the unconscious trust of a child who had never known his father's protection. Victor tried to sit up, every muscle in his body protesting. That's impossible. I would know if I had a... Chicago, Ayanna interrupted, her voice steady as a surgeon's blade. Healthcare Innovation Conference. 6 years ago, the Marriott rooftop bar where you bought me champagne and told me I had the most brilliant mind you'd ever encountered. The memory slammed into him with brutal clarity. The conference. The beautiful medical resident who had challenged his presentation, forcing him to defend points he'd never questioned. Her laugh that had cut through the noise of networking executives like music he'd never heard before. The way she'd looked at him like he was more than just his net worth. One night, one perfect, intoxicating night where he'd forgotten to be the Ice King and remembered what it felt like to be human. Then he'd panicked, done what he always did when things got too real, too complicated. He'd disappeared, vanished without explanation, without apology, without looking back. "Mommy," the boy whispered, tugging on Ayanna's scrubs. "Why does the sick man look like me?" Ayanna's composed mask finally cracked, just for a moment. Just long enough for Victor to see the pain she'd been carrying alone for 6 years. The weight of raising his child without his knowledge, without his support, without his name. As Micah looked up with those unmistakable Hale family eyes, Victor's heart monitor spiked. The truth wasn't just staring at him. It was calling her mommy and asking innocent questions that shattered everything Victor thought he knew about his own life. Hit that like button if you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found out you had a child you never knew existed? 6 years ago, she was just another brilliant woman he conquered and discarded. Today, she was the only reason he was still breathing. The Chicago Healthcare Innovation Conference had been just another business trip for Victor Hale. Another opportunity to showcase his medical AI company, sign lucrative partnerships, and remind the industry why they called him the Ice King of Silicon Valley. He delivered his keynote with his usual precision, cold facts, impressive statistics, and enough corporate charm to close deals without actually caring about the people his technology was supposed to help. The Marriott rooftop bar had glittered with city lights and possibility that October evening. Victor nursed his usual scotch, already mentally drafting tomorrow's acquisition emails, when Sheed approached his table. "Your presentation was impressive," Sheed said, sliding into the seat across from him without invitation. "Also completely wrong about patient care integration." Most people didn't challenge Victor Hale. Certainly not 20-something medical students with more ambition than net worth. But Ayanna Brooks looked him straight in the eye and dismantled his entire healthcare philosophy with the kind of passionate intelligence that made his chest tight. She was beautiful. Yes, the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement, but it was her mind that captivated him. The way she talked about medicine like it was a calling, not just a career. How she made him remember why he'd started his company in the first place, before profit margins and stock prices became the only metrics that mattered. "You're saying my technology doesn't actually help patients?" he'd asked, genuinely curious for the first time in years. "I'm saying your technology helps hospitals make money," she'd replied, sipping the champagne he'd ordered without being asked. "There's a difference." They'd talked until the bar closed. About medicine, about purpose, about dreams bigger than bank accounts. She was finishing her residency at Johns Hopkins, planning to specialize in cardiac surgery because she wanted to literally hold hearts in her hands and make them beat stronger. Have you ever met someone who reminded you of who you used to be before life made you harder? Someone whose passion reignited something you thought you'd lost forever? Drop a heart in the comments if you've experienced that moment when someone sees the person you could still become. Back in his hotel room, she'd been everything he'd forgotten he wanted. Not because she was impressed by his wealth, she barely seemed to notice it, but because she was impressed by his potential, by the man she believed he could be if he stopped hiding behind his corporate armor. He'd traced constellations across her skin with his fingertips, whispering medical terminology that sounded like poetry when he said it. Perfect, he'd breathed against her collarbone, meaning it in ways that terrified him. She believed him then, believed in a version of himself he'd shown her for exactly 12 hours. Her inexperience had been obvious, endearing, and absolutely intoxicating. She'd given him something precious, not just her body, but her trust, her hope, her vision of a future where someone like him could love someone like her. The morning after had been different. Reality crashed in with his assistant's phone calls about board meetings and hostile takeovers. The warmth of her body beside him suddenly felt dangerous, too real, too much like the life he'd convinced himself he didn't want. So he'd done what Victor Hale always did when emotions threatened his control. He'd run, left while she was still sleeping, her dark hair spread across his pillow like silk. No note, no explanation, no forwarding contact information. He told himself it was better that way. Cleaner. She deserved someone who could love her without fear, and he deserved the predictable loneliness of his glass tower empire. But now, sitting in this Georgia hospital room 6 years later, staring at the son he'd never known existed, Victor realized his cowardice had cost him everything that actually mattered. Back in the hospital room, Victor's memory returned in fragments. Her laugh, her passion, the way she'd made him feel human for one perfect night. "Chicago," he whispered, the word heavy with recognition and regret. Ayanna's jaw tightened, her professional mask sliding back into place like armor. "Congratulations. Your brain surgery didn't damage your ability to break hearts." The machines around them beeped steadily, marking time that couldn't be recovered, chances that couldn't be reclaimed. But in the eyes of the little boy who carried his DNA and her strength, Victor saw something he'd never expected to find again. Hope. Share in the comments below. Have you ever been someone's perfect night, but not there tomorrow? Tell me about a time someone made you feel chosen, then chose to leave. And don't forget to subscribe because this story is just getting started. She chose silence over child support, pride over his money, but she never chose to stop loving the man who taught her that some promises are made to be broken. The pregnancy test had shown 2 pink lines 3 weeks after Chicago. Ayanna had stared at those lines in the tiny bathroom of her Baltimore apartment, hands shaking as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was 26, drowning in medical school debt and carrying the child of a man who'd vanished like smoke. She called his office exactly once. His assistant had been polite but firm. Mr. Hale was unavailable. Would she like to leave a message with her name and the nature of her call? Tell him Dr. Ayanna Brooks called about Chicago, she'd said, hating how desperate she sounded. He never called back. The Baltimore apartment had been small enough that Micah's first steps crossed the entire living room. But it was theirs, every sleepless night, every proud moment, every milestone unmarked by the man whose DNA created them. Ayanna had worked double shifts at the hospital while pregnant, studied for medical boards with morning sickness, and delivered other people's babies while carrying her own. Her mother, Viola, had been her saving grace. A retired school teacher with hands strong enough to hold a crying infant and a heart big enough to love a grandchild whose father was nothing more than a story about a conference in Chicago. You sure you don't want to try reaching him again? Viola had asked when Micah turned 2, his green eyes already showing signs of the intelligence that would mark him as different from other children. He made his choice, Mama, Ayanna had replied, bouncing Micah on her hip while reviewing surgical procedures. I'm making mine. What would you do? Tell someone they're a parent when they've already proven they don't stay. Or protect your child from that rejection. Share your thoughts below because this decision haunts every single parent who's been abandoned. The struggles have been real and relentless. Childcare during her surgical rotations cost more than she made. Micah's first fever had coincided with her most important exam. She'd missed his first word, Mama, because she was in surgery saving someone else's heart while hers broke a little more each day. But she'd also experienced joys Victor would never know. Micah's first laugh, bright as sunshine breaking through storm clouds. The way he'd curl up against her chest during late-night study sessions, tiny fingers gripping her stethoscope like a security blanket. His endless questions about how hearts worked, why people got sick, and whether Mama could fix everyone who was hurting. By the time Micah started asking about his daddy, Ayanna had her answer prepared. Some people aren't ready to be parents, baby, but that doesn't mean you're not wanted. Mama and Grandma Viola love you enough for a whole family. Micah would nod solemnly, those piercing green eyes, so much like his father's, processing information with the same analytical precision that would one day make him formidable in whatever field he chose. The hardest part wasn't the money or the exhaustion. It was the way other relationships felt hollow after Chicago. Every man she dated came up short against the memory of 12 hours when someone had seen her brilliance and reflected it back like sunlight. Even when Victor had proved himself coward, he'd also proved that she was worth wanting, worth remembering, worth more than she'd ever believed about herself. Now, in this hospital room, watching Victor's face as he processed 6 years of missed birthdays and bedtime stories, Ayanna felt that old familiar ache. Not for what they had, but for what Micah had missed. A father's pride at his first successful bike ride. Someone to teach him to throw a baseball or explain why boys sometimes feel sad for no reason. Why didn't you tell me? Victor's voice cracked with something she'd never heard from him before. Vulnerability stripped, raw, and bleeding. Because, Ayanna replied, checking his four with steady hands that betrayed none of the earthquake happening in her chest. You made it clear I was disposable. I wasn't about to make our son disposable too. The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a judgment, like the truth he'd spent 6 years running from. When Victor tried to sit up, reaching toward Micah with desperate hands, the boy instinctively stepped behind his mother. The movement was small but devastating. A 5-year-old's instinctive understanding that some adults couldn't be trusted, even when they shared his DNA. It's okay, baby, Ayanna whispered, her voice gentle but firm. He's just visiting. The word hung in the air, like a challenge. Visiting. Temporary. Not permanent. Not dependable. Not the kind of man who stayed when things got complicated. Tell me in the comments. What's the difference between charity and respect? Between pity and compassion? When someone abandons you, do you owe them a second chance to hurt the child you protected? Share your thoughts, because this choice defines everything that happens next. The blood that saved his life came from the woman whose heart he'd stopped beating. But the match that mattered most wasn't medical, it was genetic. Victor Hale had collapsed during his keynote address at the Atlanta Medical Technology Summit, his heart stopping mid-sentence about profit margins and market penetration. One moment, he was commanding a room full of healthcare executives. The next, he was unconscious on the polished conference room floor while paramedics fought to restart the organ that had apparently been failing him for months. Emory University Hospital's cardiac unit was where they'd brought him, where Dr. Ayanna Brooks happened to be finishing her shift after a successful triple bypass surgery. She'd been reviewing patient charts in the break room when the emergency call came through. Billionaire tech CEO, massive heart attack, needed immediate surgery and a rare blood type match for the transfusion that could save his life. The donor database had reduced their connection to compatibility percentages and blood types, turning 6 years of absence into a single blinking match on a computer screen. AB negative with specific protein markers that occurred in less than 1% of the population. In the entire Georgia regional database, Dr. Ayanna Brooks was the only perfect match. She'd stared at the name on the patient intake form until the letters blurred. Victor Hade, the man who disappeared from her life like morning fog. The father of the child sleeping safely at home with Grandma Viola, unaware that his biological father was dying 20 minutes away. Could you save someone who hurt you if they needed you? Is forgiveness about them, or about who you choose to be? Tell me what you would have done, because Ayanna had exactly 30 seconds to decide before Victor's heart stopped permanently. I'll do it, she told the charge nurse, rolling up her sleeve before she could change her mind. Anonymous donation. The patient doesn't need to know the donor's identity. She'd given him her blood the same way she'd once given him her heart, completely, without reservation, because saving lives was what she did. It was who she was, regardless of personal history or private pain. Now, 3 days later, watching Victor process the reality of their son, while her blood literally kept him alive, Ayanna felt the strange symmetry of their situation. She'd save him twice. Once in Chicago when he'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh, and now literally with the blood flowing through his veins. Victor's gaze kept shifting between her face and Micah's, cataloging similarities, processing genetic evidence he couldn't deny. The way Micah's eyebrows furrowed when he was thinking, exactly like Victor's did during difficult board meetings. How the boy's fingers drummed against his leg when he was impatient, a nervous habit Victor recognized from his own reflection. You saved me, Victor said quietly, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed yesterday. The donor match, it was you. Ayanna didn't confirm or deny, just continued checking his chart with professional efficiency. But Micah, with the innocent honesty of childhood, filled the silence. Mommy gave blood to lots of people, he announced proudly. She says sharing helps everyone stay alive. Victor's eyes widened as understanding crashed over him. You knew it was me. When they called for the donor, you knew who you were saving. I'm a doctor, Ayanna replied, not meeting his gaze. I save people. It's not personal, but they both knew it was personal. Every drop of blood flowing through his veins carried her DNA, her choice to save him despite everything. She'd given him life twice now, and both times he'd taken it without understanding the gift. Micah moved closer to Victor's bed, curiosity overcoming caution. Are you really sick? You don't look sick like the other people Mommy helps. I was very sick, Victor said softly, his entire attention focused on the little boy who carried his genes and her compassion. But your mommy made me better. She's good at that, Micah nodded seriously. She fixes everybody's hearts. The double meaning wasn't lost on either adult. Ayanna fixed hearts professionally, but Victor's had been broken long before his medical emergency. 6 years of emotional isolation, of choosing profit over people, of building walls so high he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Victor watched Ayanna work, remembering the precision of her hands in different contexts, the way her concentration made her bite her lower lip exactly as she had that night in Chicago. His body responded despite their complicated history, despite the medical equipment and antiseptic smell that should have killed any romantic thoughts. But seeing her in her element, competent, compassionate, saving lives with the same hands that had once traced patterns on his chest, was more attractive than any memory. "You saved me twice," he said when Micah had wandered to the window to watch helicopters landing on the hospital's roof. "Once in Chicago when I forgot what it felt like to laugh, and now, literally." Ayanna finally looked up from his chart, her dark eyes unreadable. "I'm a doctor, Victor. I save people. It doesn't mean anything beyond that." But Micah's small voice cut through their carefully maintained distance. "Mommy, why did you give a man your blood if he made you cry?" Ayanna froze, her composure cracking like ice under pressure. She'd never told Micah about the tears, about the nights she'd held his infant body and wondered what his father was doing, whether he ever thought about Chicago, whether he'd care if he knew what his 12 hours of passion had created. Victor's heart monitor spiked as understanding flooded through him. She'd cried for him. This strong, brilliant woman had shed tears over his disappearance. And somehow their 5-year-old son had absorbed that pain without understanding its source. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about second chances. And tell me in the comments, when was the last time someone's simple touch left you breathless? Share your story below. Meeting your son for the first time shouldn't happen in a hospital room where machines keep reminding you that you almost died before knowing he existed. Micah approached Victor's bed with the fearless curiosity of a child who'd been raised to believe the world was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. His small fingers traced the edge of the hospital blanket, while those unmistakable Hale family eyes studied every detail of the man who looked so much like him. "Does it hurt?" Micah asked, pointing to the surgical scar visible above Victor's hospital gown. "A little," Victor admitted, surprised by how much he wanted to be honest with this boy, his boy. "But it's getting better every day." Micah nodded solemnly, then pulled up his sleeve to reveal a small scar on his forearm. "I fell off my bike last month. Mommy said scars prove we're brave enough to try hard things." Victor's chest tightened. This was his son, his brilliant, fearless, perfectly imperfect son who'd been growing up without him, learning life lessons from a mother who'd had to be both parents while he counted money in Silicon Valley. "That's a very wise mommy," Victor said, his voice thick with emotions he'd spent years suppressing. Ayanna watched from across the room, her professional mask slipping as she observed their first real interaction. Victor moved around the hospital room like he owned it, already showing signs of the perfectionism that ran in Hale blood. But there was something else, a warmth, an openness that Victor had never possessed. What do you see when you look at your parents and yourself? The good, the challenging, the unexpected? Share what traits you've inherited in the comments, because genetics is more than just physical features. It's the soul patterns we pass down without realizing. "Are you really my daddy?" Micah asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. Victor's breath caught. He looked at Ayanna, silently asking permission to claim the title he'd never earned. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Yes," Victor said simply. "I am. Where have you been?" The question was innocent, but it hit like a physical blow. Victor struggled for an answer that wouldn't destroy this fragile moment. I didn't know you existed, Micah. If I had known, I would have been here from the beginning." It was partially true, though Victor wasn't sure he would have been emotionally capable of fatherhood 6 years ago. The man who'd fled Chicago in panic wasn't the same one lying in this hospital bed, humbled by mortality and stunned by the miracle of unexpected parenthood. Micah seemed to accept this explanation, his 5-year-old logic filing it away with other adult mysteries like taxes and why vegetables were mandatory. Instead, he climbed carefully onto the edge of Victor's bed, settling beside him with the unconscious trust that should have belonged to Victor from birth. Mommy says I'm smart like doctors, Micah announced proudly. I can already read chapter books, and I know all the bones in the body. Really? Which bone is your favorite? The femur, because it's the strongest. Mommy says strong bones help us stand up when things try to knock us down. Another life lesson wrapped in medical terminology. Victor was beginning to understand that Ayana had raised their son with the same combination of scientific precision and emotional wisdom that had captivated him in Chicago. As the afternoon wore on, Micah's natural chattiness filled the hospital room with stories about kindergarten, his best friend Marcus, and the cardboard robot he was building with Grandma Viola. Victor absorbed every detail, trying to memorize 5 years of his son's life in a few hours. Do you want to see my drawings? Micah asked, pulling a crumpled paper from his backpack. I draw hearts like Mommy fixes. The child's artwork was surprisingly detailed for a 5-year-old. Anatomically correct hearts with chambers clearly labeled, blood vessels drawn with careful precision. At the bottom, in careful kindergarten handwriting, hearts work better when they're not broken. Victor's own heart clenched as he studied his son's artwork. This boy understood concepts that had taken Victor 42 years to learn. That hearts, literal and metaphorical, functioned better when they were whole, when they were connected, when they weren't protecting themselves from love. Ayana's attraction intensified as she watched Victor with her child. The way he listened to Micah's endless questions with genuine interest, how he adapted his complex vocabulary to match a 5-year-old's understanding, the unconscious protectiveness that seemed to awaken in him whenever Micah moved near the medical equipment. This was the man she'd glimpsed in Chicago, not the corporate ice king, but the human being hidden underneath layers of professional armor. When visiting hours ended and Micah fell asleep curled against Victor's hospital bed, Ayana moved to lift him. The boy had inherited his father's stubborn streak and had refused to leave despite her gentle coaxing. Let him stay, Victor whispered, his hand protectively covering Micah's small shoulders. Please. For the first time since he'd awakened, Ayana looked directly into Victor's eyes without her professional mask. What she saw there made her hands tremble. Not the calculating coldness she remembered, but something raw and desperate and absolutely genuine. Love. The kind of instant, overwhelming, life-altering love that happened when someone realized they'd found the missing piece of themselves they'd never known was lost. Have you ever seen someone fall in love with their own child? That moment when biology becomes emotion becomes an unbreakable bond? Tell me in the comments about the most powerful love you've witnessed, because what happened next changed everything. As Micah slept peacefully between them, his small hand unconsciously gripping Victor's hospital gown, Ayana saw her son's face relax in a way she'd never noticed before. Like some tension she hadn't even realized he carried had finally released. Her little boy had been waiting his whole life to meet his father. And despite everything, the abandonment, the years of silence, the hospital setting that should have been traumatic, Micah had recognized something in Victor that even Ayana was struggling to deny. Home. Safety. The other half of his genetic equation that made him feel complete. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the next chapter brings a crisis that will test everything they think they're building. And tell me, when someone shows you a completely different side of themselves, do you trust it? Share your thoughts below. His assistant's panicked voice cut through the hospital's peace like a knife through butter. Mr. Hale, the board is voting to remove you tomorrow. They think you're dying. Victor's face went cold. The man Ayana had been getting to know, the one who read bedtime stories and asked gentle questions, disappeared. In his place sat the Ice King of Silicon Valley. Have you ever watched someone transform right before your eyes? Not gradually, but instantly, like flipping a switch? That's what happened to Victor Hale in that moment. The warmth drained from his features. His voice dropped to that corporate tone that could freeze water. Transfer the call to my laptop, he commanded. Get Morrison, Chun, and Davidson on video. Now, Ayana stepped back, suddenly remembering why she'd run from Chicago all those years ago. This version of Victor was dangerous. Not physically, but emotionally. He had the power to make people feel small, disposable, forgotten. The hospital room transformed into a war zone. Laptops appeared, legal documents scattered across his bedside table. Conference calls filled the air with corporate speak that made her skin crawl. "Johnson, you're fired," Victor said to someone on screen, his voice flat as concrete. "Clear out your office. Security will escort you." "Victor," the man pleaded, "the decision is final." Click. The call ended. Another human being dismissed like trash. Ayana watched from the corner, her medical training warring with her maternal instincts. This was the father of her child. This was the man she'd started to care about again. But this was also the reason she'd kept Micah hidden for 6 years. "Mommy." Micah's small voice came from the doorway. He'd been coloring in the hallway, but the raised voices had drawn him back. Why is Daddy yelling at people? The word Daddy hit Victor like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged. For a split second, the mask slipped and she saw the man underneath. Exhausted, conflicted, trapped between two worlds that demanded different versions of himself. But the damage was done. "This is why I never told you," Ayana said quietly, her voice steady but her heart breaking. "This is who you are when things matter to you. Everything else is just entertainment." Victor looked up at her, then at Micah, who was clutching his coloring book like a shield. The boy's green eyes, so like his father's, were wide with confusion and something that looked like fear. "It's not that simple," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Ayana picked up Micah, settling him on her hip. "You have a choice every single day about who you want to be. For 6 years, you chose this." She gestured at the laptops, the papers, the corporate chaos that had taken over their peaceful space. "And now you want to choose us too? You can't have both, Victor. Not if being this person is how you protect what matters to you." The truth hung in the air like smoke from fire. Victor closed his laptop slowly, the corporate calls forgotten. But Ayana could see it in his eyes, the calculation, the weighing of options, the same look he'd worn in Chicago when he decided she wasn't worth staying for. "I need 24 hours, he said finally. "For what?" "To fix this. To show you that I can choose differently." Ayana shifted Micah's weight, feeling her son's small body pressed against hers. Solid, real, hers to protect. "The last time you asked for time, you disappeared for 6 years. I know. The last time you made me believe you could be different, I spent 9 months throwing up and crying, wondering what I'd done wrong. I know. So forgive me if I don't trust your 24 hours. Victor's phone buzzed again. Another crisis, another fire to put out, another choice between the empire he'd built and the family he'd discovered. He looked at the phone, then at them, then back at the phone. What he did next would change everything. He powered off the phone completely. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said to Ayana. "Not the company, not the board. You. What do you need me to do to prove that you and Micah matter more than anything else?" Before she could answer, Micah spoke up in that clear, innocent way children have of cutting straight to the heart of things. "Are you going to leave us again, Daddy?" The question hung in the room like a challenge, like a prayer, like the most important test Victor Hale had ever faced. She'd built walls around her heart for 6 years, but watching him read bedtime stories to their son was like taking a sledgehammer to her defenses. 3 days had passed since Victor turned off his phone. 3 days of watching him choose them over corporate calls. 3 days of seeing glimpses of the man she'd fallen for in Chicago. The one who made her laugh, who listened when she talked about her dreams, who made her feel like the most important person in the world. But walls built from heartbreak don't crumble overnight. Have you ever tried to trust someone who broke you before? It's like learning to walk again after a bad accident. Every step feels dangerous. Every moment of happiness comes with the fear that the ground might give way beneath you. Once upon a time, Victor's voice drifted from Micah's makeshift bed in the hospital room. There was a prince who lived in a castle made of ice. Ayana paused in the doorway, fresh coffee growing cold in her hands. The scene before her looked like something from a dream she'd never dare to have. Victor, still connected to monitors, but sitting up strong, with Micah curled against his side. Her son, their son, listening with the kind of attention he usually reserved for Saturday morning cartoons. "Why did the prince live in ice?" Micah asked, his small finger tracing patterns on Victor's hospital gown. "Because Ice was safe," Victor said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Ice doesn't change. Ice doesn't leave. Ice doesn't break your heart." "But ice is cold, Daddy." "Yes, it is. Very cold." Did the prince get lonely? Victor's eyes found Iana's across the room. The look that passed between them was heavy with history, with apologies that hadn't been spoken, with possibilities that scared them both. "Yes," Victor said, still watching her. The prince got very lonely, but he didn't know how to live anywhere else except his ice castle. He'd been there so long, he forgot what warmth felt like. What happened to him? "Well," Victor said, shifting so Micah could see the pictures in the book better. "One day, the prince met a beautiful doctor who had magic in her hands. She could heal people with just her touch." Iana's breath caught. This wasn't just a bedtime story. This was confession wrapped in fairy tale, apology disguised as children's literature. Did she heal the prince? She tried to, but the prince was scared. He thought if he left his ice castle, he might melt completely. So he ran away. "That was dumb," Micah said with the brutal honesty of childhood. Victor laughed, actually laughed, and the sound sent warmth flooding through Iana's chest. Yes, it was very dumb. The prince realized later that melting might not be so bad. Maybe melting meant becoming something better, something real. Did he go back to the doctor? He tried to, but by then, she'd built her own castle to protect herself, and she had a little prince of her own to take care of. Micah sat up straighter. "Like me? Exactly like you. So what did the prince do?" Victor glanced at Iana again, his expression vulnerable in a way that made her remember Chicago nights and whispered promises. He's still trying to prove that he's not made of ice anymore, that he can be warm enough, strong enough, real enough to deserve a place in their castle. "I think he should try harder," Micah said matter-of-factly. "What do you think he should do?" Maybe he could start by saying sorry, and meaning it, and not running away when things get scary. Out of the mouths of babes. Iana felt tears prick her eyes as her 5-year-old son dispensed wisdom that some adults never learned. "That's very good advice," Victor said solemnly. "Should we finish the story tomorrow? I think the prince needs to think about what you said." "Okay, but Daddy..." "Yes. I hope the prince figures it out. The doctor and the little prince probably miss him, even if they built walls to protect themselves." After Micah fell asleep, Iana found herself alone with Victor for the first time since his corporate meltdown 3 days ago. The monitors beeped softly in the background, but otherwise, the world felt suspended, waiting. "He's wise for his age," Victor said quietly. "He has to be. Single-parent kids learn to read situations fast. They learn to protect themselves." The words were meant to sting, and they did. Victor flinched but didn't look away. "Iana, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't apologize with words. Don't make promises you're not sure you can keep. Just show me. Every day. Show me who you want to be. And if I mess up..." The question was so vulnerable, so different from the corporate shark she'd witnessed 3 days ago, that it almost undid her completely. Then you try again the next day, and the day after that, until trying becomes who you are instead of just something you do. Victor nodded slowly. The prince in the story, he loves the doctor. He never stopped loving her, even when he was too scared and stupid to show it properly. "I know," Iana whispered, "but love isn't just a feeling, Victor. It's a choice you make every morning when you wake up. It's choosing someone's happiness over your own comfort. It's staying when leaving would be easier. I'm learning that. Good, because Micah deserves a father who chooses him every single day. And I deserve a partner who chooses us even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard," she thought but didn't say. As if reading her mind, Victor's hand found hers in the dim hospital lighting. His fingers were warm, real, present. "Teach me," he said simply. And for the first time in 6 years, Iana thought maybe, just maybe she would. The emergency wasn't Victor's heart failing again. It was Iana realizing hers had never stopped beating for him, even when she wished it would. The alarms cut through the hospital's quiet like a blade. Code blue. Room 314. All hands to trauma. Iana was on her feet before her mind fully processed the announcement. her body responding to years of training. She'd been checking Victor's vitals when the call came, their conversation about second chances interrupted by someone else's crisis. "I have to go," she said, already moving toward the door. "Go," Victor said, understanding immediately. "Save them." She paused at the threshold, looking back at this man who was learning to put others first. "Keep an eye on Micah, always." The trauma bay was chaos when she arrived. A 50-year-old construction worker, massive heart attack, family in the waiting room, praying for miracles. The kind of emergency that reminded everyone in the hospital why they'd chosen medicine in the first P. "What do we have?" Ayana's voice cut through the noise as she scrubbed in. "Massive anterior MI, V-fib arrest, down for 12 minutes before they got him back. He's barely hanging on. 12 minutes without oxygen." Most people didn't come back from that with their minds intact. But most people wasn't this person's family, waiting in terror just beyond those doors. "Prep for emergency surgery. Give me 2 units of O negative and call the cardiac team." Now, what happened next was 3 hours of control violence against death itself. Ayana's hands moving with precision that looked like art but felt like war. Every cut, every stitch, every command shouted across the operating table was a battle for someone's father, someone's husband, someone's tomorrow. She'd forgotten that Victor had followed them down. Forgotten he was watching through the observation window as she fought to save a stranger's life with the same intensity she'd used to save his. When the patient's heart finally beat on its own, steady, strong, alive, the trauma team cheered. But Ayana just stood there, hands shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline, staring at the monitors that showed life where there had been death. "Beautiful work, Dr. Brooks," the head of cardiology said, pulling off his surgical mask. "Textbook save." It wasn't textbook. It was instinct and training and 6 years of proving herself in a field that still questioned whether she belonged. It was everything she'd built while Victor was conquering Silicon Valley, every skill she developed while raising his son alone. The crash came later, like it always did. The high of saving a life, followed by the exhaustion of carrying that responsibility. She found herself in a supply closet, back against the door, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of what had just happened. That's where Victor found her. "Hey," he said softly, settling beside her on the floor, like sitting in hospital supply closets was something billionaires did every day. "Hey, hell of a thing to watch," he said. "Which part?" "All of it, but especially the part where you refused to let him die, even when everyone else was ready to call it." Ayana closed her eyes, remembering the moment when the patient's heart had stopped responding to treatment. When the team started exchanging those looks that meant they'd done everything they could. When she'd looked at the clock and calculated how long they'd been trying and made the decision to try harder. "His daughter is 8 years old," she said quietly. "Same age Micah will be in a few years." I kept thinking about her, waiting in that lobby, believing that someone was going to save her daddy. And you did. We did. Medicine isn't a solo sport. Victor was quiet for a moment, processing this world that was so different from corporate boardrooms and hostile takeovers. A world where winning meant someone else got to go home to their family. "This is what you do," he said, and it wasn't a question. "This is who I am. I'm starting to understand the difference." She turned to look at him, then really look at him, still pale from his own surgery, still technically a patient himself, but he'd left his bed to follow her into the chaos, to see her in her element, to understand what mattered to her. "In Chicago," she said carefully, "you asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I told you about surgery, about saving people, about making medicine more accessible. Do you remember what you said?" Victor's jaw tightened. "I said it was noble. You said it was noble, but not practical. You said I'd burn out in 5 years trying to save everyone. You said I should consider medical technology instead, something scalable." The words hung between them like old wounds finally allowed to air. "I was wrong," he said simply. "You were scared," she corrected. "Scared of being with someone who cared about something more than money or power or winning. Someone who might ask you to care about those things too." And now, Ayana studied his face, looking for signs of the man who'd fled Chicago when things got real. Instead, she saw someone who'd spent 3 hours watching her save a life, who'd left his own recovery to support hers, who'd learned her son's bedtime preferences and morning routines like they were the most important data in the world. "Now I think you're still scared," she said. "But maybe you're more scared of losing us than you are of changing." "Much more scared," he admitted. "Good. Fear means it matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd loved each other badly the first time, trying to figure out how to love each other better. "The man upstairs," Victor said eventually. "The one you saved." His family was crying when they got the news. Happy tears. Relief tears. His wife couldn't stop hugging everyone. "That's the best part of the job. I want to understand that feeling. Not just watching it, but being part of it. Being someone who makes other people's lives better instead of just more profitable." Ayana felt something shift in her chest, like a locked door finally opening. There's a medical foundation dinner next week. Fundraising for free clinics in underserved communities. Want to be my date? Are you asking me to spend an evening talking about healthcare access instead of quarterly earnings? I'm asking if you want to see what it looks like when your resources could save lives instead of just making money. Victor's smile was soft, real, nothing like the corporate shark grin she remembered from boardroom photos. "Dr. Brooks, I would be honored to be your date." "Good. Because I should warn you, I'm going to ask you to write a very large check by the end of the evening." "I'm counting on it." As they stood to leave the supply closet, Victor caught her hand. "Ayana, yeah, what you did in there today, saving that man's life, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about the surgery. I'm talking about who you are when everything is on the line. How you fight, how you care, how you never give up." The words hit her harder than any declaration of love ever could. Because this was Victor seeing her, really seeing her, for who she was instead of who he needed her to be. "Come on," she said, squeezing his fingers. "Let's go check on our son." "Our son." The words came naturally now, no longer a secret or a burden, but a simple truth that belonged to both of them. Maybe that was what second chances really looked like. Not erasing the past, but building something better on the foundation of who you'd become because of it. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed, until the moment you realize the only thing worse than crossing them is spending your life wondering what could have been. Victor's discharge day arrived like a test nobody was prepared for. 6 weeks in a hospital had created a bubble around them, a safe space where they could explore feelings without making permanent decisions. But discharge meant real life. It meant choosing what came next. "The apartment in San Jose is ready whenever you want to come back," his assistant said over the phone, her voice crisp with efficiency. "The board is eager to meet with you about the expansion plans." Victor looked around the hospital room that had become home. Micah's drawings covered every surface. Ayana's medical journals were stacked on the windowsill next to coffee cups and takeout containers. It looked like a life, messy, real. "There's cancel the San Jose apartment," he said quietly. "Sir, you heard me. And tell the board I'll be working remotely for the foreseeable future." "From where?" Victor's eyes found Ayana's across the room. She was pretending to read Micah's homework, but he could tell she was listening to every word. "From home," he said. After he hung up, the silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "You can't just uproot your entire life because of us," Ayana said finally. "I'm not uprooting my life. I'm finally planting it somewhere it can grow." "Victor, have dinner with me. Tonight. Not in a hospital room, not with medical equipment beeping in the background. Just dinner. Let me take you on a proper date." The word date hung in the air like a dare, because a date meant acknowledging what had been building between them. It meant stepping out of the safety of medical necessity and into the dangerous territory of choice. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why?" "Because I'm scared," she thought. "Because the last time I let you take me to dinner, I ended up pregnant and alone. Because Micah is just starting to believe you might stay. And if you change your mind now, it will destroy him." "Because it's complicated," she said instead. "The best things usually are." That evening, Ayana found herself standing in front of her closet like a teenager preparing for prom. What did you wear to dinner with the father of your child? The man who broke your heart? The person you were maybe possibly falling in love with all over again. She settled on a blue dress, simple, elegant, the kind of thing that could be casual or formal, depending on where they ended up. The kind of dress that said she was trying but not too hard. Victor picked her up at 7, and the sight of him in civilian clothes, dark jeans, button-down shirt, no medical equipment in sight, made her stomach flutter in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simplicity of the compliment hit harder than any flowery declaration. "Thank you." They drove through Atlanta in comfortable silence, the city lights painting patterns on the windshield. She'd expected him to take her somewhere expensive and flashy, the kind of restaurant where reservations required weeks of planning and the wine cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Instead, he pulled up in front of a small Caribbean place in her neighborhood, the kind of spot with plastic tablecloths and home-cooked food and servers who knew your name. "I asked Micah where you like to eat," Victor said, noticing her surprise. "He said you come here every Friday after work. Something about the best jerk chicken in Atlanta." The fact that he'd asked their son, that he'd listened to Micah's suggestions about how to make her happy, did something complicated to her heart. Dinner was easy in a way that surprised them both. They talked about medicine and technology, about Micah's school and Victor's plans to open a medical AI research facility in Atlanta. They avoided the heavy topics, Chicago, the years apart, what they were doing here together, and focused on the simple pleasure of each other's company. "You know," Ayanna said over dessert, "I used to imagine what it would be like if you came back. In the early days, when I was still angry and hurt and missing you anyway. What did you imagine? Grand gestures, expensive apologies, you showing up with explanations that would make everything make sense. And now I think the most romantic thing you've done is learn that Micah likes his sandwiches cut diagonally and that he can't sleep without his nightlight." Victor reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I have 6 years of details to learn. 6 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and first days of school that I missed. I can't get that time back, but I can pay attention now. Is that what this is? Making up for lost time?" "No," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "This is me trying to build something new. Not fixing the past, but creating a future worth having." The drive back to her apartment was charged with possibility. When he walked her to the door, she found herself hesitating with her keys in her hand. "Coffee?" she heard herself ask. "I'd like that." Her apartment felt smaller with Victor in it, his presence filling spaces she kept carefully empty. He moved through her living room like he belonged there, touching picture frames and children's artwork, asking questions about the life she'd built without him. "This is where Micah took his first steps," she said, pointing to the space between the couch and coffee table. "Right there." He was chasing a ball and just stood up and walked like he'd been doing it forever. "I'm sorry I missed it." He did it again the next morning, and the morning after that, like he was making sure I saw it too. They were standing close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Close enough that when he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. "Ayanna," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back to just co-parenting. I don't want to go back. What if you change your mind? What if you wake up tomorrow and remember all the reasons you left before?" Victor's hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then I'll wake up the day after that and choose you again. And the day after that, until choosing you becomes as natural as breathing." The kiss, when it came, was soft and desperate and tasted like second chances. Like 6 years of missing each other, of wondering what if, of building separate lives that never quite felt complete. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ayanna rested her forehead against his. "Micah's at my mom's tonight," she said quietly. "I know, so if you want to stay, are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she took his hand and led him toward her bedroom. Because some questions could only be answered with action, with skin and breath, and the kind of honesty that only came in the dark. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like her perfume and his soap, Victor traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I dreamed about this," he admitted. Even when I was pretending I didn't miss you. Even when I convinced myself I was better off alone. What did you dream? That I was brave enough to fight for you the first time. That I didn't run when things got real. That I got to wake up next to you and our son every morning for the rest of my life. Ayana turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim light. And now I know the difference between dreams and goals. Dreams are things you wish for. Goals are things you work for every single day until they become real. So what's your goal, Victor Hale? His smile was soft and certain and full of promises that maybe, this time, he was strong enough to keep. To earn my place in your life. To be the partner you deserve and the father Micah needs. To love you both so well that you never doubt you made the right choice letting me stay. Outside, Atlanta hummed with late-night traffic and distant music. Inside, two people who'd loved each other badly the first time held each other close and planned how to love each other better. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something more valuable, a beginning built on truth instead of fantasy, on choice instead of chance. And for the first time in 6 years, Ayana fell asleep believing in happily ever after. She'd learned to live without him once before, but watching him choose between her and his empire felt like dying slowly instead of all at once. The call came at 6 in the morning, shattering the peaceful quiet of Ayana's bedroom, where Victor had spent the night learning the geography of her body all over again. Mr. Hale, his assistant's voice was sharp with panic through the speakerphone. The emergency board meeting is today. If you're not here to defend yourself, you'll lose everything. The hostile takeover goes through at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Victor sat up in bed, instantly alert despite having barely slept. Ayana watched his face transform from the tender lover who'd whispered her name in the darkness to the corporate shark who'd built an empire from nothing. What's the situation? His voice was clipped, professional, cold. Morrison led a coalition. They're calling for your immediate removal as CEO. They say your personal situation has compromised your judgment. That you're unfit to run a publicly traded company. Personal situation. Like their family was a stock option gone bad. And if I don't show, they have the votes, sir. You lose controlling interest. The company gets broken up and sold. Everything you built disappears. Ayana pulled the sheet higher, suddenly feeling naked in more ways than one. She'd heard this voice before, in Chicago, when business called and she became disposable. The difference was, now she understood what was at stake. Not just money, but Victor's entire identity. Everything he'd spent 15 years building. I need an hour, Victor said. Sir, with respect, you need a plane. The jet is fueled at Hartsfield. We can have you in San Jose by noon Pacific if you leave now. After he hung up, the silence in the bedroom felt like a tomb. Ayana stared at the ceiling, counting her heartbeats, waiting for him to say something that would make this not feel like Chicago all over again. I have to go, he said finally. I know, it's not what you think, isn't it? She turned to look at him, this man who'd made love to her with such reverence just hours ago, who was now calculating flight times and board votes. This is exactly what I think it is. Ayana, how long? The question came out sharper than she intended. How long what? How long will you be gone? Days? Weeks? Months? Or is this like Chicago, where you just don't come back? Victor ran his hands through his hair, and she could see the war being fought behind his eyes. The man who wanted to stay versus the man who'd never learned how to lose gracefully. I don't know, he said, and his honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. Right. She got out of bed, pulling on her robe with sharp, angry movements. In the mirror, she caught sight of herself. Hair tangled from his fingers, lips swollen from his kisses, looking exactly like a woman who'd been thoroughly loved and was about to be thoroughly abandoned. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said, watching him get dressed with the efficient movements of a man accustomed to quick exits. You, choosing everything else over us. I'm not leaving you. I'm fighting for us. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the same thing. Victor stopped, buttoning his shirt, his hands stilling at her words. If I lose the company, I lose everything. Not just money. Influence, connections, the ability to provide for you and Micah. Everything I could bring to this relationship. You think that's what I want from you? Your money. I think I need to be worthy of you." The words hung between them like a confession and an accusation all at once. Because she understood what he meant. Victor Hale, without his empire, was just a man with abandonment issues and a history of running when things got complicated. But Victor Hale, with his billions, was someone who could protect them, provide for them, build the kind of life he thought they deserved. "You're already worthy," she said quietly. "You became worthy the moment you chose to stay in that hospital room instead of flying back to San Jose. You became worthy when you learned Micah's bedtime routine and asked about my work and made love to me like I was something precious instead of something convenient. But if I can't protect you, from what? I'm a cardiac surgeon, Victor. I have a good job, a nice apartment, health insurance, and a retirement plan. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to choose me." The distinction seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He sat heavily on the edge of her bed, still half-dressed, looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with corporate takeovers. "What if I can't do both? Then you have to decide what matters most. That's not fair. Life rarely is. But this is exactly what I was talking about when I said love is a choice you make every morning. This is the choice, Victor. Right now, this moment." As if summoned by their raised voices, Micah appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant and looking confused by the tension in the room. "Mommy? Why are you and Daddy fighting?" Ayana's heart clenched at the word Daddy, spoken so naturally, like Victor had always been part of their morning routine instead of a 6-week visitor who might disappear again. "We're not fighting, baby," she said, kneeling to his level. "Daddy has to go to work today. Is he coming back?" The question was innocent, but it landed like a grenade in the room. Because it was the same question Ayana had been afraid to ask, the same fear that had kept her walls up even as she led him into her bed. Victor looked at their son, really looked at him, taking the tousled hair and sleepy eyes and absolute trust that Daddy would come back because Daddy had promised he would stay. "Yes," Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm coming back. When Victor glanced at Ayana, then back at Micah. "I don't know exactly when, but I promise you, I'm coming back." "Okay." Micah accepted this with the faith of a child who hadn't yet learned that adults sometimes broke promises. "Can you make pancakes before you go? The special ones with the faces." And that's when Ayana saw it, the exact moment Victor realized what he was walking away from. Not just her, not just the abstract concept of family, but Saturday morning pancakes with smiley faces made for blueberries. Bedtime stories and scraped knees, and a little boy who'd started calling him Daddy like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, buddy," Victor said, his voice thick. "I can make pancakes." As he stood to follow Micah to the kitchen, Ayana caught his hand. "This isn't Chicago," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you to choose between success and failure. I'm asking you to choose between two different definitions of success. And if I choose wrong, then you live with the consequences. But Victor, if you get on that plane today, if you choose the company over us, I won't be here when you get back. Not as your girlfriend, not as your second chance, not as anything more than Micah's mother who happens to share custody with you." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from fire that would either burn everything down or forge something stronger. Victor stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating, weighing the cost of losing his company against the cost of losing them. The fact that it was even a calculation broke her heart a little more. "I need to think," he said. "No, you don't. You need to feel. You need to stop treating this like a business decision and start treating it like what it is, a choice about what kind of man you want to be." In the kitchen, Micah was already dragging a chair to the counter, chattering about pancake shapes and weekend plans that assumed his father would be there to see them. The sound of their son's voice, so full of trust and expectation, followed them like a reminder of what was at stake. Victor looked toward the kitchen, then back at Ayana, then at his phone buzzing with messages from San Jose. "I love you," he said suddenly, fiercely. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens, I love you both more than I knew it was possible to love anything." "I know," she whispered, "but love without action is just poetry." And I need more than beautiful words, Victor. I need a partner. He kissed her then, desperate and achingly tender, like he was trying to pour 6 years of regret and a lifetime of promises into a single moment. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. "Give me today," he said. "Let me make pancakes with my son and spend one more morning being the man I want to be. Then I'll decide. Victor, please, just let me have this morning before everything changes." And because she loved him, because she remembered what it felt like to be that scared and that torn, she nodded. One morning, she agreed. "But when those pancakes are done, you decide. Company or family, empire or home. You don't get both." As they walked toward the kitchen together, toward Micah's laughter and the promise of blueberry faces and one last ordinary morning, Ayanna couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching Victor Hale's empire crumble in real time, one pancake at a time. The question was, would he let it fall, or would he sacrifice everything else to keep it standing? By noon, she'd have her answer. Fighting for your company is one thing. Fighting for your soul while your family watches from 3,000 miles away is another war entirely. Victor made his choice over blueberry pancakes shaped like smiley faces. "I have to go to California," he told Micah, watching his son's face crumble like the pancakes on his plate. "But I'm coming back. I promise." When? Micah's voice was small, uncertain. "Soon. That's what you said before, and you were gone for 6 years." The words came from 5-year-old's mouth, but they hit like bullets fired by someone much older. Someone who'd learned not to trust promises from men who said they'd return. Have you ever watched your child lose faith in you in real time? Have you seen that exact moment when innocence dies and gets replaced by the kind of caution that shouldn't exist in kindergarten hearts? That's what Victor saw in his son's green eyes, and it nearly broke him. But he got on the plane anyway. The Silicon Valley boardroom felt like a glass cage 3,000 miles from everything that mattered. Victor sat at the head of the table, looking at faces that had once respected him, now calculating how to divide up his life's work like vultures over roadkill. "The Atlanta situation has compromised your judgment," Morrison said, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. "A CEO who abandons board meetings for personal drama isn't fit to lead a publicly traded company." "The Atlanta situation," Victor repeated slowly, "is my family." Exactly our point. For 6 weeks, Victor fought. Conference calls that stretched past midnight. Legal documents that filled briefcases. Strategic moves that would have made Sun Tzu proud. He battled for every share, every vote, every piece of the empire he'd spent 15 years building. But every night, when the lawyers went home and the offices emptied, he called Atlanta. "Daddy, guess what happened at school today?" Micah's voice would fill his empty apartment, bringing warmth to spaces that felt more like a museum than a home. "Tell me everything, buddy." And Micah would. The playground drama, the math test he aced, the art project that looked like a rocket ship but was supposed to be a tree. Normal kid stuff that felt like oxygen to a man drowning in corporate warfare. But the calls got shorter. Micah got distracted by toys, by cartoons, by the life that continued in Atlanta, whether Victor was part of it or not. "He's adjusting," Ayanna said carefully during one of their late-night conversations. "Kids are resilient. Is that good or bad?" "I don't know." The honesty in her voice cut deeper than any insult could have, because adjusting meant Micah was learning to live without his father. "Again, how are you?" Victor asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Busy. We had 3 surgeries today." Mrs. Patterson from down the hall brought Micah cookies. He's learning to ride a bike. All the milestones Victor was missing. All the ordinary moments that made up a childhood happening without him. "I should be there." "Yes, you should." No comfort, no reassurance that he was doing the right thing. Just truth, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's blade. "The takeover attempt failed today," he said, needing to share something that felt like victory. "Good. I kept controlling interest. The company is still mine. Congratulations." Her voice was flat, distracted. He could hear Micah laughing in the background, probably watching cartoons or playing with toys that Victor had never seen. "Ayanna, yeah, do you still love me?" The question hung in the digital space between them, carried by satellites and fiber optic cables across a continent that might as well have been an ocean. "I love the man who made pancakes with our son 6 weeks ago," she said finally. "I'm not sure who you are anymore." The call ended, and Victor stared at his phone screen until it went dark, showing him his own reflection in the black glass. He looked tired, older, like a man who was winning battles, but losing the war that actually mattered. His assistant knocked on the door, arms full of documents that needed signatures. "Sir, the merger papers for the Atlanta medical facility are ready. Should I proceed with the acquisition?" Victor had forgotten about that. The plan to bring his medical AI technology to Georgia to build something in Ayana's world that would justify his presence there. What's the timeline? 6 months to break ground. 18 months to full operation. It would be our flagship facility for medical AI integration. A year and a half. By then, Micah will be 7. By then, Ayana might have stopped waiting for him to figure out what mattered most. "Cancel it," Victor said. "Sir, cancel the Atlanta facility. Sell the medical AI division entirely." His assistant stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. "Sir, that division represents 30% of our future growth projections. I said cancel it." After she left, Victor sat alone in his office, looking out at the city lights that had once represented everything he wanted. Now they just look cold. His phone buzzed with a text from Ayana. "Micah's school play is Thursday at 7 p.m. He's playing a tree. Thought you should know." A tree. His son was playing a tree in a school play, and Victor was 3,000 miles away fighting for a company that suddenly felt less important than applause from a kindergarten audience. He typed back, "I'll be there." Then he deleted it. Then he typed again. Then he stared at the message for 20 minutes, his thumb hovering over the send button like it held the weight of his entire future. Because sending that text meant admitting that Morrison was right, that his judgment was compromised, that he cared more about a 5-year-old's tree costume than quarterly earnings reports. It meant choosing them over the empire he'd bled to build. It meant becoming the kind of man who showed up instead of the kind who made excuses. Victor hit send. Then he booked a flight to Atlanta. Outside his office window, Silicon Valley glittered with the dreams of 1,000 entrepreneurs, all chasing the same success he'd already achieved and was now ready to walk away from. But for the first time in 6 weeks, Victor Hale felt like he was finally moving in the right direction. He won the war for his company, but realized he was losing the battle for his family. Until a 5-year-old's wisdom showed him what victory actually looked like. The Atlanta airport buzzed with travelers rushing toward their destinations. But Victor stood still in the arrival gate, flowers in one hand and resignation letter in the other. Not resignation from his company, resignation from the man he used to be. The flight from San Jose had given him 6 hours to think about what he was walking back to. Maybe Ayana had moved on. Maybe Micah had stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. Maybe he'd waited too long to figure out that some things mattered more than winning. But he was here now. That had to count for something. The drive to Micah's school felt like traveling through a life he'd glimpsed but never fully lived. Suburban streets lined with family cars and bicycles left on front yards. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' names and kids played outside until streetlights came on. The kind of place Victor had never imagined himself belonging. The school auditorium was packed with parents holding phones and cameras. Everyone focused on a stage decorated with cardboard trees and construction paper flowers. Victor slipped into the back row just as the lights dimmed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the teacher announced, "please welcome our kindergarten class in their presentation of the Magic Forest." 23 5-year-olds filed onto the stage in various costumes. Rabbits and squirrels, flowers and mushrooms, and there, third from the left, one small tree with brown felt trunk and green paper leaves. Micah. Victor's heart stopped. His son stood perfectly still, arms raised like branches, face serious with the concentration of a child taking his job very seriously. When the narrator mentioned the wise old tree who protected all the forest creatures, Micah straightened his shoulders with pride. "The tree was the strongest in the forest," the narrator continued, "because it had deep roots and never gave up. even when the storms came. From across the darkened auditorium, Victor felt eyes on him. He turned and saw Ayanna 3 rows ahead. Her attention split between the stage and his unexpected presence. Even in the dim lighting, he could see the surprise on her face, followed quickly by something that looked like hope. After the performance, as parents crowded the stage to congratulate their little actors, Victor hung back. He wasn't sure of his welcome, wasn't sure if showing up unannounced was romantic or selfish. "Daddy!" Micah's voice cut through the crowd like a beacon. His son, still in his tree costume, was pushing through groups of adults, green paper leaves rustling with each step. You came to see me be a tree." Victor dropped to his knees just in time to catch Micah's flying hug, breathing in the scent of school paste and childhood excitement. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy. Did you see me? I didn't move at all during the whole show. Even when Tommy the rabbit stepped on my foot. I saw you. You were the best tree in the entire forest. Mommy said you might not make it because of work." Victor glanced up to find Ayanna approaching, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes showing everything she was trying to hide. "Work isn't more important than you," Victor said, speaking to Micah but looking at Ayanna. "Nothing is more important than you." Later, after they'd celebrated with pizza and ice cream, after Micah had fallen asleep between them on Ayanna's couch, still wearing half his tree costume, Victor and Ayanna finally had the conversation that had been 6 weeks in the making. "How long are you staying this time?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you'll have me." Ayanna studied his face in the soft glow of the living room lamp, looking for signs of the man who'd left her 6 weeks ago chasing corporate salvation. "The company? Still mine, but I've made some changes." "What kind of changes?" Victor pulled out his phone, showing her the email he'd sent from the plane. "I'm stepping back as CEO, staying on as chairman, but working remotely. The day-to-day operations belong to someone else now. And you're okay with that?" "I'm okay with being the kind of father who shows up to school plays. I'm okay with being the kind of partner who's present for dinner conversations and bedtime stories. I'm okay with building a life that matters more than a stock price." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, processing this information like the careful surgeon she was. "What made you change your mind?" "Micah's text about the school play. The realization that I was about to miss another milestone, another memory, another chance to be part of his childhood. And the fact that winning my company back felt hollow when I had no one to share it with. Victor, I know I hurt you. I know leaving for 6 weeks, right after we found each other again, was exactly the wrong thing to do. I know I have to earn your trust back." Ow! The question was simple, but loaded with 6 years of disappointment and 6 weeks of fresh wounds. "By staying, by showing up, by choosing you and Micah every single day until you believe that's who I am now. And if I can't, what if the trust is too broken to fix?" Victor looked down at Micah, sleeping peacefully between them. His paper leaves crumpled, but his face relaxed with the security of having both parents present. "Then I'll keep trying anyway, because this..." He gestured at their son, at the cozy apartment, at the ordinary domestic scene that felt more valuable than any corporate boardroom. "This is worth fighting for." Ayanna followed his gaze to Micah, her expression softening. "He missed you," she admitted. "He kept asking when you were coming home. I didn't know what to tell him." "What did you say?" "That some people show up when it matters, and some people don't, and that we'd find out which kind you were. And now I guess we'll see." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever. But it was a chance, and that was more than Victor had dared to hope for. "There's something else," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "What is it?" "Custody papers. Legal documentation that makes me Micah's father officially. I had my lawyers draft them while I was in California." Ayanna took the papers, scanning the legal language that would give Victor parental rights he'd never claimed. "Why now?" "Because running away to save my company was the last selfish thing I want to do as his father. From now on, every decision I make considers what's best for him. And what's best for him is having a father who's legally and emotionally committed to being present. This is a big step, the biggest, but I'm ready for it. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Micah stirred in his sleep, instinctively curling closer to Victor's warmth. He's been sleeping better since you texted about the play, Iana said softly, like some part of him knew you were coming back. I'm not going anywhere again. Not for business, not for board meetings, not for anything that isn't a genuine emergency. Promise? I promise. This time, when Victor made a promise, it felt different. Not like words meant to buy time or ease guilt, but like a commitment carved in stone. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his other pocket. Victor, if that's a ring. It's not. He pulled out a small wrap package. It's for Micah. A congratulations on being the best tree in Atlanta present. Inside the package was a small wooden sculpture, a tree with deep roots and strong branches, carved with intricate detail. It's beautiful, Iana breathed. I had it made in California. I wanted him to have something that reminded him that being strong doesn't mean standing alone. The best trees grow in forests, supported by the roots of the trees around them. Like family, exactly like family. As Atlanta settled into sleep around them, three people who'd found their way back to each other sat together on a couch, surrounded by the quiet comfort of home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of Victor's commitment, new opportunities to prove that people really could change. But tonight was enough. Tonight was showing up. Tonight was choosing love over fear, family over empire, presence over profit. Tonight was the beginning of everything that mattered. The only thing more dangerous than a billionaire's enemy is someone who threatens his child, especially when that child doesn't even know his father yet. Victor had been back in Atlanta for 3 weeks when the first lawyer's letter arrived. Mr. Hale, Iana's voice carried across her apartment as she sorted through the mail. There's something here addressed to you. The envelope was thick, expensive paper with a law firm's letterhead that made Victor's blood run cold. Mollison, Kisler Associates. The same firm that had tried to engineer his corporate takeover. Inside was a custody petition. What is it? Iana asked, noticing how his face had gone pale. Morrison is trying to take Micah. The words hit the room like a bomb going off. Iana snatched the papers from his hands, her medical training keeping her calm even as her maternal instincts went into overdrive. On what grounds? She demanded, scanning the legal language. Paternal fitness concerns due to recent erratic behavior and abandonment of corporate responsibilities. Victor read over her shoulder. Subject minor has been raised in single-parent household due to father's extended absence and demonstrated pattern of unreliability. This is insane. You've been here 3 weeks. You've been to every school pickup, every bedtime, every meal. Morrison doesn't care about that. He cares about revenge. Have you ever had someone weaponize your child against you? Have you ever watched a legal document turn your family into a battlefield where the casualty could be a 5-year-old's sense of security? Victor felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. Not the Ice King persona he'd worn in boardrooms, but something deeper, more dangerous. The protective fury of a father whose cub was being threatened. He can't win this, Iana said, but her voice shook with uncertainty. He doesn't have to win. He just has to make it expensive and public enough to destroy our family in the process. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. 28 days to prepare for a battle where the stakes weren't money or power, but Micah's future. Victor hired the best family law attorney in Georgia, a woman named Rachel Chun who looked like she could take on the Supreme Court and win. The good news, Rachel said during their first meeting, is that you have recent documentation of consistent presence and involvement. School records, medical appointments, the custody agreement you filed 3 weeks ago. And the bad news? Morrison's team will paint a picture of a man who abandoned his child for 6 years, then abandoned him again for 6 weeks to save his business empire. They'll argue that your recent involvement is performative, designed to look good for the courts rather than genuine paternal commitment. But that's not true, Iana protested. Truth and legal strategy aren't always the same thing, Rachel replied. We need to prove not just that Victor is a good father now, but that he's committed to being a good father permanently. That means character witnesses, documentation of lifestyle changes, proof of financial stability that prioritizes family over business. The preparation consumed their lives. Depositions from Micah's teachers, testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed Victor's involvement, financial records that showed his shift from profit-maximizing CEO to family-focused chairman. But the hardest part was explaining to Micah why strangers in suits were asking questions about his family. "Am I in trouble?" he asked one evening after a particularly difficult interview with a court-appointed child advocate. "No, buddy," Victor said, pulling his son onto his lap. "You're not in trouble. Some grown-ups are having a disagreement about what's best for you, but you haven't done anything wrong. Are you going to have to go away again?" The question hit Victor like a punch to the chest, because that's exactly what Morrison was hoping for, to create enough fear and uncertainty that Micah would start seeing his father as a source of chaos rather than comfort. "I'm not going anywhere," Victor said firmly. "Whatever happens, I'm staying right here with you and Mommy. Promise." "I promise." That night, after Micah was asleep, Victor found Ayanna in the kitchen, stress cleaning dishes that were already spotless. "We need to talk about worst-case scenarios," she said without looking up from the sink. "Ayanna, what if Morrison wins? What if the court decides you're unfit? What happens to Micah then?" Victor moved behind her, gently taking the dish towel from her shaking hands. "That's not going to happen. You don't know that. I know that I'll fight for him. I know that I'll use every resource, every connection, every dollar I have to protect our son. And if that's not enough..." Victor turned her around to face him, seeing the fear in her eyes that she'd been hiding behind practical concerns and legal preparations. "Then we'll face it together." But Morrison underestimated something important. "What?" "He thinks this is about money and power. He thinks I'll back down to avoid the publicity, the expense, the damage to my reputation. Won't you?" Victor's smile was cold, calculating, nothing like the warm father who read bedtime stories and made pancakes with smiley faces. "He's threatening our child, Ayanna. There's no amount of money, no business deal, no corporate reputation worth more than Micah's safety and happiness." Morrison wanted to see the old Victor Hale, the ruthless bastard who built an empire from nothing. He's about to get exactly what he asked for. The transformation was subtle but complete. Victor still showed up for school pickups and bedtime stories, still helped with homework and weekend adventures. But underneath the devoted father exterior, the corporate shark was circling, planning Morrison's complete destruction. "I'm not just fighting for custody," Victor told Rachel during their final strategy session. "I'm ending Morrison's career, his firm, his reputation, everything." "Victor, that's not what family court is about. Family court is about protecting children. And the best way to protect Micah is to make sure Morrison never has the resources or credibility to threaten another family again." Rachel looked concerned, but she nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Win this case. Keep my son safe. Let me handle the rest." The night before the hearing, Victor sat in Micah's room, watching his son sleep. The wooden tree sculpture sat on the nightstand, its carved roots deep and strong. "Tomorrow, I'm going to court to fight for you," he whispered. "Not because I have to, but because you're worth fighting for. Because you deserve a father who shows up, who stays, who protects you from people who would use you as a weapon." Micah stirred in his sleep, instinctively reaching toward the sound of his father's voice. "I love you, buddy. More than any company, any amount of money, any version of success I used to think mattered. You and Mommy are my success now." Outside, Atlanta slept peacefully, unaware that tomorrow would determine whether a little boy got to keep both his parents or lose his father to a billionaire's revenge. But Victor wasn't worried anymore. Morrison had made the mistake of threatening the two people Victor loved most in the world. And that was a war Morrison had no chance of winning. Some proposals happen with rings and roses. Others happen in courtrooms where you prove that love is more than a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. The courthouse steps should have felt like concrete and bureaucracy, but with Micah between them and legal documents proving their family's legitimacy, they felt like the foundation of something permanent. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. The family courtroom was smaller than Victor had expected, more intimate than the corporate battlegrounds he was used to. But the stakes were infinitely higher. Morrison sat at the opposing table with his team of lawyers, looking confident and predatory. He'd bet everything on painting Victor as an unstable, absent father whose recent involvement was nothing more than a performance for the courts. He was about to learn how expensive that bet would be. "Your Honor," Rachel began, "this case isn't about custody. It's about revenge. Mr. Morrison lost a corporate battle and is now using an innocent child as a weapon against my client." "Objection," Morrison's lawyer interjected. "Mr. Morrison's motivations are irrelevant. The facts speak for themselves. Mr. Hale abandoned his son for 6 years, then abandoned him again for 6 weeks while pursuing business interests. And yet, Rachel continued smoothly. In the 7 weeks since returning to Atlanta, Mr. Hale has attended every school function, every medical appointment, every parent-teacher conference. He's legally established paternity, provided financial support, and relocated his primary residence to be present in his son's daily life." The testimony began with character witnesses. Micah's teachers describing Victor's involvement and his son's improved behavior since his father's return. Neighbors who'd watched Victor coach weekend bike riding lessons in the apartment complex parking lot. The pediatrician who'd seen Victor at every appointment, asking detailed questions about Micah's health and development. But the most powerful testimony came from Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the child psychologist who'd been observing Micah throughout the process. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Martinez said, "this child has experienced significant positive changes since his father's consistent presence began. His anxiety levels have decreased, his social confidence has improved, and he demonstrates a strong, healthy attachment to both parents." And what would be the psychological impact of disrupting this attachment? Rachel asked. "Devastating. Children who lose primary caregivers, even those gained later in life, often develop attachment disorders, trust issues, and behavioral problems that can last well into adulthood." Morrison's team tried to paint Victor as an opportunist, a man whose sudden interest in fatherhood was calculated rather than genuine. They brought up the corporate takeover attempt, the 6-week absence, the pattern of prioritizing business over personal relationships. But they made a critical mistake. They called Victor to the stand. "Mr. Hale," Morrison's lead attorney began, "isn't it true that you only became interested in your son when you needed positive publicity to counter your corporate image problems?" Victor looked directly at Morrison, his voice steady and clear. "No, I became interested in my son the moment I woke up and saw him standing next to my hospital bed. I became committed to him when I realized I'd rather lose my entire company than miss another day of his childhood. But you did leave him. For 6 weeks, you chose your business over your family." "Yes, I did. And it was the worst mistake of my life." The honesty caught everyone off guard. Most defendants would deny, deflect, minimize. Victor owned his failures completely. "I spent 6 weeks fighting for a company that suddenly felt meaningless without my family to share it with. I won that fight, then immediately restructured my entire life so I'd never have to choose between business and family again. How do we know you won't make the same choice again when the next crisis arises?" Victor's smile was cold as winter. "Because the next crisis just arose, and I'm here fighting for my son instead of in a boardroom protecting my assets." "Mr. Hale, what would you say to critics who argue that your wealth and influence make you unsuitable as a father figure?" "I'd say they're confusing net worth with self-worth. My value as a father isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in bedtime stories read, scraped knees kissed, school plays attended, and promises kept." Rachel's cross-examination was brief but devastating. "Mr. Hale, has anyone ever threatened your child before this custody challenge?" "No." "And what was your response when that threat materialized?" "I hired the best legal team in Georgia, restructured my business operations to ensure maximum availability for family responsibilities, and prepare to spend whatever amount of money and time necessary to protect my son." In other words, you treated the threat to your family as your highest priority? "My only priority." The judge's decision came after a brief recess that felt like hours. "This court finds that Mr. Morrison lacks standing to petition for custody, as he has no legal relationship to the minor child and has demonstrated no evidence of genuine concern for the child's welfare. Furthermore, this appears to be a vindictive action designed to weaponize the court system for personal grievances. Victor felt Ayana's hands squeeze his under the table. Mr. Hale, while your history shows periods of absence and poor judgment, your recent actions demonstrate genuine commitment to your son's well-being. The petition for custody modification is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Morrison from any future harassment of this family. The gavel came down like thunder. Outside the courthouse, as Morrison's team slunk away in defeat, Victor knelt down to Micah's eye level. "It's over, buddy. No one's going to try to take you away from us ever again." "Good," Micah said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "Can we get ice cream now?" "We can get whatever you want." That evening, after the celebration dinner and the ice cream and the long bath that washed away the stress of the day, Victor found himself alone with Ayana on her apartment balcony. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For fighting alongside me. For not giving up on us when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for proving that people really can change." Victor reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Ayana's breath catch. "This isn't because of the custody case," he said quickly. "This isn't because we won or because I'm feeling emotional. This is because I've spent every day for the past 7 weeks watching you be an incredible mother, an amazing doctor, and the strongest person I've ever known." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but not flashy. "Ayana Brooks, will you marry me? Not because it makes legal sense or because it's what people expect, but because I love you. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. Because I want to build a life together that's about more than just co-parenting." "Victor, I know I have more to prove. I know trust is earned over time, not declared in courtrooms. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you and Micah." Ayana looked at the ring, then at Victor's face, then out at the Atlanta skyline that had become home for all of them. "What about your company? Your life in California?" "My life is wherever you and Micah are. The company is just how I pay for that life. And if I say yes, what does that look like day to day? It looks like Saturday morning pancakes and Wednesday night homework help. It looks like parent-teacher conferences and family vacations and arguments about whose turn it is to do the dishes. It looks like ordinary, boring, wonderful domestic happiness. You promise. I promise to choose you every single day. I promise to show up, stay present, and put our family first. I promise to love you both so completely that you never doubt you made the right choice, saying yes." Ayana held out her left hand, and Victor slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to ordinary happiness. Yes to Saturday morning pancakes. Yes to spending the rest of our lives proving that love really can conquer everything." Their kiss tasted like victory and promises and the future they were finally brave enough to build together. Inside the apartment, Micah called out sleepily from his bedroom. "Mommy? Daddy? Are you coming to tuck me in?" "We'll be right there, buddy," Victor called back. And for the first time in his adult life, Victor Hale knew exactly where he belonged. 6 years ago, she gave him everything and got nothing back. Today, she gave him their future and received everything she'd never dared to dream. The Atlanta Botanical Garden bloomed around their wedding ceremony like nature's celebration. Southern magnolias and medical colleagues mixing with Silicon Valley executives who barely recognized the man Victor had become. But the most important guest was a 6-year-old boy in a tiny tuxedo, holding the rings and taking his job as ring bearer more seriously than most CEOs took board meetings. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two people who found their way back to each other through love, forgiveness, and the kind of courage it takes to change your entire life for the people who matter most." Victor looked at Ayana in her simple white dress, her hair adorned with magnolia blossoms, and felt his chest tight with emotion. She was radiant, but more than that, she was his. finally, completely, forever his. The couple has written their own vows, the minister continued. Victor took Ayana's hands, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. Ayana, 6 years ago I was too scared and selfish to recognize the gift you were offering me. I thought love was weakness, that needing someone made you vulnerable, that the safest way to live was behind walls of ice that couldn't be melted. In the front row, Micah watched with the solemn attention of a child witnessing something important. I was wrong about everything. Love isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the universe. Needing you doesn't make me vulnerable. It makes me whole. And those walls I built to protect myself nearly cost me the only thing that ever really mattered. Ayana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I promise to choose you every morning when I wake up and every night when I fall asleep. I promise to show up for every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday, every crisis and celebration. I promise to love Micah as fiercely as you do, to be the father he deserves and the partner you need. His voice broke slightly on the next words. I promise that when storms come, and they will, I won't run. I'll stay and weather them with you, because the strongest trees grow in forests, supported by the roots of the trees around them. Ayana, the minister prompted. Victor, she began, her voice clear and strong. You broke my heart 6 years ago, but you also gave me the greatest gift of my life, our son. For 6 years, I raised him alone, and I was proud of the life we built. But something was always missing. She squeezed his hands. When you woke up in that hospital room and saw Micah for the first time, I watched you fall in love. Not just with him, but with the idea of being the kind of man who could love someone completely, without reservation, without escape plans. Victor's breath caught. It took courage to let you try again. It took faith to believe you could change. It took hope to trust that this time, when you said forever, you meant it. Her smile was radiant. I promise to keep choosing hope. I promise to believe in the man you're becoming, even when you doubt yourself. I promise to love you through your fears, your mistakes, your human imperfections, because that's what marriage is. Choosing someone's growth over their past. The rings? The minister asked. Micah stepped forward with the gravity of a diplomat carrying state secrets, carefully placing the rings in the minister's outstretched palm. With this ring, Victor said, sliding the band onto Ayana's finger, I promise to love you with the same devotion you showed our son when I wasn't brave enough to stay. I promise to be worthy of the second chance you're giving me. With this ring, Ayana replied, placing Victor's wedding band on his trembling hand. I promise to trust in our future instead of fear our past. I promise to build something beautiful with you, starting today. By the power vested in me by the state of Georgia, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Victor, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was soft, reverent, witnessed by 200 guests but feeling as intimate as if they were alone. When they broke apart, Micah's voice rang out clear and happy. Does this mean Daddy lives with us forever now? The laughter that rippled through the garden was warm and genuine, but Victor knelt down to answer his son seriously. Forever and always, buddy. We're family now. Officially. Good, Micah said, adjusting his tiny bow tie. Can we have cake now? The reception was held under string lights that twinkled like stars, transforming the botanical garden into something magical. Victor's Silicon Valley colleagues mingled with Ayana's medical team, corporate sharks learning to talk to people who saved lives instead of maximizing profits. But the most touching moment came during the toasts. I've known Victor Hale for 15 years, said David Chun, Victor's former board member and longtime friend. I've watched him build an empire, crush competitors, and make decisions that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. The crowd grew quiet, but I've never seen him as happy as he is today. And I've never seen him as human as he became the day he chose love over power, family over empire, presence over profit. David raised his glass. To Victor and Ayana, may your marriage be everything your individual strengths made possible, and may your love story remind all of us what really matters. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Victor found himself alone with Ayana on the dance floor. swaying to music that played only in their hearts. "Mrs. Hale," he whispered against her ear. "I like the sound of that," she replied, pulling him closer. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life earning it." "You already have." They were interrupted by Micah, who'd somehow acquired a second piece of cake and chocolate frosting on his cheek. "Mommy, Daddy, look what I found." He held up a small piece of paper, a child's drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "I made this at school last week," he announced. "It's our family. See? There's you, Mommy, and you, Daddy, and me in the middle." Victor took the drawing with reverent hands, studying the crayon figures that somehow captured everything that mattered. "It's perfect, buddy." "I know." Miss Johnson said families come in all different shapes, but the best ones are the ones where everyone chooses to stay. Out of the mouths of babes. As they drove home that night, husband and wife, father and mother, family, Micah fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's excitement. "He's going to remember this day forever," Ayanna said softly. "Good. I want him to remember that love stories can have happy endings, even when they start with heartbreak. Especially then." Their new house, the one Victor had bought in Ayanna's neighborhood, walking distance from Micah's school, glowed warmly in the darkness. Home looked like porch lights left on and bicycles in the driveway, and the promise of ordinary mornings filled with extraordinary love. 6 months later, when Ayanna told Victor she was pregnant again, he cried. Not from shock or fear or the weight of responsibility, but from pure joy. Because this time, he wouldn't miss anything. This time, he'd be present for every doctor's appointment, every midnight feeding, every first smile and first word and first step. This time, he'd get it right from the beginning. "A baby?" Micah asked when they told him the news, his eyes wide with excitement. "A baby," Ayanna confirmed. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" "We don't know yet," Victor said. "What do you think?" Micah considered this with the seriousness of a child being consulted on important family business. "I think it should be whatever it wants to be," he decided. "But either way, I'm going to be the best big brother ever." "I know you will be, buddy." As autumn painted Atlanta in shades of gold and red, the Hale family settled into the rhythm of ordinary happiness. School pickups and family dinners, weekend adventures and bedtime stories, the kind of domestic bliss that looked boring from the outside but felt like paradise from within. Victor's company thrived under remote leadership, his medical AI innovations saving lives while he focused on the life that mattered most. Ayanna's practice expanded into underserved communities, bringing cardiac care to people who'd never had access before. But their greatest success was measured in smaller moments. Micah's laughter echoing through their house. Family movie nights where they fell asleep on the couch in a pile of blankets and popcorn. Saturday morning pancakes with blueberry smiley faces that had become a sacred tradition. On quiet evenings, when Micah was asleep and they had the house to themselves, Victor and Ayanna would sit on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint their neighborhood in warm gold. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked one evening. "The corporate life? The power and prestige?" "Never," Victor replied without hesitation. "I spent 40 years building an empire that felt empty. I'd rather spend the next 40 years building a family that feels full, even when Micah has tantrums about vegetables, especially then. And when a new baby keeps us awake all night, those are the moments that matter most. The messy, imperfect, beautifully human moments that make life worth living." Ayanna curled closer to him, her growing belly pressed against his side. "I love you, Victor Hale. I love you too, Dr. Ayanna Hale. More than I ever thought possible." As stars appeared in the darkening sky above Atlanta, Victor reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The mistakes and heartbreak, the second chances and hard-won forgiveness, the choice to build something better on the foundation of who they become. Love wasn't just a feeling. It was a daily decision, a commitment renewed every morning, a promise kept through ordinary Tuesdays and extraordinary celebrations alike. And as Micah's gentle snoring drifted from his bedroom window and Ayanna's breathing deepened into sleep beside him, Victor Hale knew he'd finally found his way home. Not to a place, but to the people who made every place feel like where he belonged. Forever and always, just like he promised. If this story of second chances and first loves touched your heart, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about love that doesn't just change people, it changes everything around them. Tell me in the comments. Do you believe people can completely transform for love? Share your thoughts on second chances. And remember, sometimes the person who breaks your heart is the same one meant to heal it, but only if they're willing to break themselves first to become worthy of the love they lost. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story, Asterisk.